Maddie Reed went down on her knees in the dust and gathered the spilled flour back into her torn sack with her bare hands, while the whole town stood on the boardwalk and laughed. "Could I have the scraps?" she had asked. They had answered by knocking the bag from her arms. She did not cry. She would not give them that, not one tear, not in front of these people. If you love stories about a forgotten woman who finally finds her worth, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see just how far Maddie's story will travel. The flour was ruined, and she gathered it anyway. It had soaked up the street, gone gray and gritty, and there was no saving it for bread. Maddie Reed knew that. She knew it the way she knew her own name. But her hands kept moving, scooping the dust and flour back into the split seam of the sack, because to stop meant to stand up, and to stand up meant to face them. "Look at her," a woman said somewhere above her, "crawling in the street like a stray." "Leave her be, Edna. It's a free country. Free for them that can pay. She can't pay for nothing." Maddie kept her head down. Her bonnet had slipped back off her chestnut hair, and the noon heat pressed on her neck like a flat iron. She could feel the sweat starting at her hairline. She refused to wipe it. "That's far enough, girl." A man's boot came down beside her hands. Not on them. Beside them. Close enough to make the point. She looked up the length of him. Polished boots, gray trousers, a brocade vest with a watch chain across it that probably cost more than a month of any honest man's wages. Victor Harland looked down at her the way a man looks at a thing he is deciding whether to step over or around. "You're making a scene, Miss Reed," he said. "It's unbecoming." "I'm collecting my flour, Mr. Harland." Her voice did not shake. She made sure of it. "I paid for it." "Did you?" He smiled. He had a fine smile, white, and even the smile of a man who had never once in his life been told no. Harland did this woman pay for that flour. The shopkeeper had come out onto his own boardwalk to watch. He was a soft, round man named Harlan Pierce, and he wrung his apron in his hands. She had it on credit. "The credit's no good no more, Mr. Harland. You said so yourself." "I did say so." Victor crouched down then so that his face was level with hers, and lowered his voice the way a man does when he wants everyone to lean in. "Here's the trouble, Miss Reed. A woman with no husband is no risk a sensible man wants to carry. A woman with no land, no kin, no money, she's worth less than a lame horse. At least a lame horse you can shoot for the hide." The boardwalk laughed. Maddie looked at him. She did not blink. "My father carried his accounts for 30 years, she said. "He never once cheated a man who trusted him. Can you say the same?" Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Just for a moment. Then it was gone, smoothed over by that smile. "Your father," he said gently, "died owing money to half the territory. That's what trust got him. I'd think on that if I were you." He stood. He brushed an invisible speck from his knee, and he said to the crowd, more than to her, "Somebody ought to put her on the noon coach back to wherever she crawled in from, before she frightens the children." He walked away. The crowd began to break apart the way crowds do once the show is over, and Maddie was left kneeling in the street with a sack of ruined flour and a small leather ledger pressed flat against her chest under her arm, the way another woman might hold a child. She got to her feet, slowly, with dignity, because dignity was the only thing left she owned outright. "Miss Reed." Harlan Pierce came down off his boardwalk, glancing both ways like a man crossing into enemy ground. "Miss Reed, I'm sorry about the flour." "I am. But you got to understand my position. Harland holds my note. He holds half the notes in this town. If he says your credit's dead, then it's dead, and there ain't a thing. I understand your position, Mr. Pierce." She brushed the worst of the dust from her skirt. The gray dress had been her good one once. "You needn't apologize for being afraid. Half the world is afraid of men like that. It's how they get to be men like that." Harlan blinked at her. "You're a strange one, you know that. So I've been told." She lifted her chin and looked down the street toward the edge of town, where the road bent off into the dry hills. "How much for a sack that isn't on the ground?" "I can't misread. I told you, I can't carry your credit no more. I'm not asking for credit." She reached into the small drawstring purse at her waist. She turned it over. 2 coins fell into her palm. She looked at them for a long moment, the way you look at the last of something. "I'm asking what these will buy." Harlan looked at the coins. He looked at her face. And to his credit, he had that much in him he looked ashamed. "That'll buy a half sack of cornmeal," he said quietly. "And I'll throw in the flour you already paid for on account of it ought to have been bagged proper." "Thank you." She closed her hand around the coins. "That's the first decent thing anybody said to me in this town." It was while Harlan was inside bagging the cornmeal that the sound came down the street. Not the rattle of a coach. The slow, heavy walk of a single horse coming off the mountain trail, hooves dragging dust, the kind of unhurried pace a man rides when he has come a long way and is in no rush to arrive anywhere worse. Maddie did not turn to look at first. She had learned in 3 days of this town that turning to look only invited more. But the talk on the boardwalk changed. It dropped. It thinned. And under it, she heard a name passed from mouth to mouth the way a warning gets passed. "That's Boone. Elias Boone. Off the ridge. Thought he was finished. Thought Harlan already had his land. Not yet. Not the way I hear it. But soon." The horse stopped. There was a creak of leather, the soft thud of a man stepping down into the street. And then nothing. A long nothing, the kind of pause that makes a whole street hold its breath without knowing why. Maddie turned then. He was tall. That was the first thing. Tall and built like a man who had spent his life lifting things heavier than himself. Fence posts, fallen calves, his own bad luck. Dust covered him from his boots to the brim of his hat, dust on his vest, dust caked in the dark of his short beard. His hair was long and tied back rough, and his eyes, when he lifted them, were a flat-tired gray that had clearly seen the whole of what had just happened, or enough of it. He was looking at the spot in the street where she had knelt. There was still a smear of gray flour ground into the dirt. He looked at it, and then he looked at her, and then he looked at the boardwalk full of people who had watched. "Somebody knock this woman's goods in the dirt," he asked. His voice was low. He did not raise it. He didn't have to. Nobody answered. "I'm asking a question," Elias Boone said. "I expect it's an easy one. Did somebody knock this woman's goods in the dirt, or did she drop 'em her own self?" "It weren't nobody's fault, Boone," a man said finally. "She was begging credit. Harlan set her straight is all." Set her straight. Elias turned the words over slow like he was inspecting a coin he suspected was bad. "By putting her flour in the street. It was an accident." "Mister, I've been knocking around dust and cattle 36 years, Elias said. "I know the difference between an accident and a man making a point. So do you." He looked at the boardwalk a moment longer, just long enough for the silence to get uncomfortable, and then he turned away from them entirely, like they had stopped being worth his time. He turned to Maddie. He took his hat off. He did it slow, 2 fingers to the brim, and he held it against his chest. And for the first time in 3 days, somebody in this town looked at Maddie Reed like she was a person instead of a problem. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry for your trouble." Maddie did not know what to do with that. She had armored herself for cruelty. She had no armor ready for this. She felt the sting come up sudden and hot behind her eyes, the tears she would not give the town here trying to escape over one quiet man's kindness, and she beat them back down with everything she had. "There's no need to be sorry, Mr. Boone," she said. "You didn't do it." "No." He set his hat back on. "But I'm standing here while they pretend they didn't. That's its own kind of sorry." Behind them the door of the mercantile opened, and Harlan came out with a half sack of cornmeal. He stopped short when he saw Elias. "Boone," he said, "didn't know you were in town." "I gather not." Elias nodded at the sack. "That hers?" "It is." "How much she still owe?" "She paid," Harlan said quickly. "She paid square. We're settled." Elias looked at the coins, still closed in Maddie's hand. She had not yet had a chance to hand them over. and something passed across his tired might have been understanding. He knew what 2 coins looked like in a person's fist. He'd held that fist himself. "Then I reckon we're done here," Elias said. Victor Harlan came back. He had not gone far. Men like Victor never went far when there was a chance the show might start up again. He came down off the far boardwalk, that watch chain glinting, that smile back in place. "Boone," he said warmly. "Twice in a month. People will think you can't keep away from town." "Harland, I see you've met our latest stray." Victor stopped, a few feet off, looked Maddie up and down, looked at Elias. "Word of advice, neighbor to neighbor. Don't go picking up things off the street. You don't know where they've been or what they'll cost you." The street went very quiet again. Maddie watched the muscle move in the cowboy's jaw. She watched his hand. It did not go to the gun on his hip. It stayed loose and still at his side, and somehow that stillness was worse, was bigger than any drawn pistol. "You always did have a careful way of talking, Harland," Elias said. "Lot of words. None of 'em you'd be willing to say plain." "I'll say it plain then." Victor's smile did not waver. "She's worthless. No land, no man, no money. You take her up to that dying ranch of yours, and all you'll have is one more mouth eating feed you can't afford. You're a drowning man, Boone. Don't go grabbing for anchors." There was a long beat. Maddie felt her own heart going. She waited for the cowboy to step back from her the way every other man in this town had stepped back. It was the sensible thing. Victor was right about the math, even if he was wrong about everything else. Elias Boone owed her nothing. He had given her a tip of his hat and a kind word, and that was already more than she'd had in days. She would not have blamed him for keeping the rest. But Elias Boone did not step back. He stepped forward. He moved up beside her, not in front of her, not shielding her like she was something helpless, but beside her shoulder near to hers, so that the 2 of them stood together facing the man and the boardwalk, and the whole laughing town. "She'll ride with me," Elias said. You could have heard a pin drop in that street. Victor's smile finally slipped. "You're not serious." "I don't generally waste breath on things I'm not serious about. She'll ruin you. You hear me, Boone? Take her up that mountain, and you'll be the joke of 3 counties. The widow Reed and her broke cowboy scraping by on a ranch that ought to have been sold a year ago." "I expect we will be a joke," Elias said. "But I've been a joke a while now, Harland. I'm getting used to the weather up there." He turned to Maddie. He didn't grab her arm, didn't take her elbow, didn't presume. He just said low only to her, "Ma'am, I won't pretend it's a soft place I'm offering. The roof leaks. The creek's down to a trickle. I can't pay you in money I don't have. But I'll pay you in board and honest work, and at my table you'll eat off a plate same as me. That's all I've got. You're free to say no." Maddie looked at him. She looked at the worn cuffs of his shirt, and the dust on his beard, and the tiredness behind his eyes, and she understood something all at once. Standing there in the street, this man was not rescuing her. He could barely rescue himself. He was offering her a place on a sinking boat because he could not stand to leave her on the shore. And that small, terrible decency was worth more than all of Victor Harlan's polish. "I have a condition, Mr. Boone," she said. A few people on the boardwalk laughed at that. A condition. Her. Elias did not laugh. "Name it." "I don't take charity." Maddie lifted her chin. "I've had charity offered to me 3 times in this town, and every time it came with a price I wasn't willing to pay. So understand me. I'll keep your accounts, and I'll cook your meals, and I'll mend what's torn, and I'll work harder than any man you ever hired, but I work for my place. I don't beg for one. If that's not the offer, then you keep your roof, and I'll keep my pride, and we'll both be poorer for it, but at least we'll be square." For the first time, something moved at the corner of the cowboy's mouth. Not quite a smile. The memory of where a smile used to live maybe before the drought and the debt took it. "Ma'am," he said, "that's the only kind of offer I know how to make. I never could afford the charitable kind." "Then I accept." Victor Harland watched the 2 of them, and the smile was entirely gone from his face now. What was left underneath it was uglier, the look of a man who has had a thing taken from his hand that he had already decided was his. "You're making a mistake, Boone," he said quietly. The warmth was gone. This was the real voice, the one he kept under the silk. "That mortgage of yours comes due at the end of summer. You know it does. And there's not a bank in this territory will carry a man who can't make his payment. You think this woman and her little book are going to change arithmetic? Arithmetic is arithmetic. The ranch is going to come to me. It was always going to come to me. The only question is whether you walk off it with your dignity or whether I have to throw you off." "Funny thing about my dignity," Elias said. "Hard to throw a thing off a man that he's already given up worrying about." He gathered the horse's reins. "Miss Reed, when you're ready." "I'm ready." Mattie tucked her father's ledger more firmly under her arm. She took the half-sack of cornmeal from Harlan, who let it go without meeting her eyes. "Mr. Pierce, thank you for the meal that wasn't on the ground. Miss Reed," he swallowed, "you watch yourself up there. It's hard country." "I've had a hard year," she said. "I expect we'll get along." They walked together to the edge of town, the tall, dusty cowboy leading his horse and the gray-dressed woman walking beside him with her ledger and her cornmeal. And behind them, the whole boardwalk watched in a silence that had gone from cruel to something else, uneasy maybe. The uneasy quiet of people who have just watched a thing happen that they don't yet understand, but suspect they will be made to understand later. Victor Harland watched them the longest. He watched until they were small on the road. Then he turned to a man who had come up quiet beside him, a thin man with a clerk's stoop and ink on his fingers. "Caleb," Victor said. "Yes, Mr. Harland?" "The Boone note. When does it come due exactly?" "September the 1st, 41 days. "And the amount?" $1,120 with the interest." Victor watched the road. "He hasn't got it. He hasn't got a tenth of it. The cattle prices I've been paying him, he couldn't raise it if he sold every head he owns." A slow smile came back to his face, but a cold one now with no warmth in it at all. "Still, I don't care for surprises, Caleb. And that woman has a careful look about her, the kind that reads things twice." He turned. "Go through Boone's account at the bank again. Every receipt, every entry. Make sure it's clean. Make sure there's nothing in there a careful person could pull on." Caleb hesitated. "It's not entirely clean, Mr. Harland. There's the matter of the cattle sale in the spring. The price we recorded." "I know what we recorded." Victor's voice cut him off soft and sharp at once. "I'm telling you to make sure no one else ever does. Burn what needs burning. Now." The clerk swallowed and hurried off. Out on the road, Elias Boone and Mattie Reed walked toward the mountains, and neither of them spoke for a long while. The town fell behind. The dust of the trail rose around their feet and settled. It was Mattie who broke the silence. "May I ask you something, Mr. Boone?" "You can ask. Why did you do it?" "You don't know me. You owe me nothing. And that man's right. I can't pay. I've got nothing, and I'll be one more burden on a place that already can't carry the weight it has." She kept her eyes on the road ahead. A sensible man would have tipped his hat and ridden on. "So why didn't you?" Elias walked a few more steps before he answered. When he did, he didn't look at her, and his voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with the dust. "My mother died begging credit," he said. "Different town, long time ago. I was a boy. She'd ask the shopkeeper real polite, 'Could I have the scraps, sir? Just the ends? Just what you'd throw to the dogs?' And they'd laugh at her, same as they laughed at you today." He was quiet a moment. "I swore when I got grown if I ever saw a woman put in the dirt for being poor, and I had a horse and a roof I wouldn't ride on, that's all. Ain't nothing noble in it. It's just a thing I swore." Mattie stopped walking. He went a few steps before he realized, then stopped too, and turned back. "Mr. Boone," she said. Her voice was not quite steady now. "When I asked the shopkeeper this morning before the flour, before any of it, do you know what I asked him?" "No, ma'am. I asked him for the scraps." She pressed her lips together hard. "The day-old bread he sets out back for the pigs. I asked, could I have the scraps? And he said the pigs had more right to it than I did, because at least the pigs would be eaten in the fall and turn a profit, and I'd just being worthless. She made herself say the rest. I haven't eaten since the day before yesterday, Mr. Boone. I sold my mother's brooch to a man on the coach for the price of a room I never got to use. So when you say your mother asked for scraps, I want you to know that I understand it. Right down to the bone, I understand it. Elias Boone looked at her for a long time. Then he said very quietly, Ma'am, when we get up to my place, the first thing I'm going to do is put a full plate in front of you. Not scraps, not the ends. A full plate at the table in a chair like a person. And I don't ever want to hear you ask anybody for scraps again as long as you've got a place under my roof. You understand me? She could not answer. She just nodded fast and looked away at the mountains so he wouldn't see her face. Good. He clicked to the horse. Come on then. It's a long climb and I'd as soon get you fed before dark. They walked on. And though neither of them said it, neither of them would have known how to say it. Something had changed in the space between them. On that road some small foundation stone had been set quiet and unannounced, the kind a whole life can later be built on. It was near evening when they came up over the last rise, and the ranch showed itself in the fold of the dry valley below, a strong-built house gone gray for want of paint, a barn with a sag in its roofline, a creek run down to a thread of silver in a wide stony bed, and cattle scattered thin across the brown grass. Far fewer than such a spread was meant to carry. Maddie stopped at the top of the rise and looked down at it. It's not much, Elias said beside her. There was no apology in it, but there was something underneath, something braced, like a man waiting to be laughed at on his own ground. It was my father's, and his before him. We carved it out of nothing, and for a while it was something, and now... He stopped. Now it's mostly debt and stubbornness. But it's mine until September, and a man's got to keep something. Maddie looked at the leaking barn, and the thin cattle, and the failing creek. She had spent enough nights over her father's books to know exactly what she was looking at. She was looking at a place 40 days from being lost. But she was also looking at the only person in this whole hard country who had stood beside her instead of stepping back. Mr. Boone, she said, may I see your accounts tonight? After supper. He glanced at her, surprised. My accounts? They're a mess. I never had the head for the figures the way my father did. Books and ledgers. He stopped himself before he said, that's man's work, because she'd told him plain in the street how she felt about that, and because looking at the sharp, careful set of her face, he was beginning to suspect she'd be better at it than he'd ever been. That's exactly why I'm asking, Maddie said. She tucked her father's ledger tighter under her arm. Because somewhere in those messy books, Mr. Boone is the reason a hard-working man with good land and good cattle is 40 days from losing everything. And men don't lose everything by accident as often as they think they do. She started down the slope toward the house. Numbers don't lie. People do. And I've got a feeling somebody's been lying to you in ink. Elias Boone stood at the top of the rise a moment longer, watching the gray-dressed woman walk down toward his failing ranch with her chin up and her father's ledger held against her like a weapon. And for the first time in a year, the first time since the drought came and the debt started, and the cattle prices fell so low it made no sense. He felt something move in his chest that he had nearly forgotten the shape of. It was small. It was foolish. He didn't dare name it out loud, not even to himself. Up there alone on the rise with the summer dust going gold around him. But it felt after all this time very much like hope. He clicked to the horse and started down after her. The plate hit the table in front of her, and Maddie stared at it like it might be taken back. It was a full plate. Beans and salt pork, and a thick cut of cornbread, steam still rising off it. Elias set down his own plate across the table, the same, no more, no less, and pulled out his chair and sat. And when he saw she hadn't moved, he frowned. Something wrong with it. No. Her voice came out thin. She cleared her throat. No, Mr. Boone, it's just... She looked at the plate. She looked at the chair under her, a real chair at a real table with a man sitting across from her like she was company instead of a stray. I told you I hadn't eaten since the day before yesterday. You did. I meant it as a fact. I didn't mean it as begging. I didn't take it for begging. He picked up his fork. Eat your supper before it goes cold, ma'am. We'll talk after. A body can't think on an empty stomach, and I've got a feeling you and me have got some thinking to do tonight. She ate. She tried to do it slow, tried to do it the way a lady does. Small bites set the fork down between. She lasted about 4 bites before the 2 days caught up with her, and she was eating the way a starving person eats, and she hated that he could see it, and she couldn't stop. Halfway through, she had to put the fork down and press the back of her wrist hard against her mouth, because the food and the kindness together had broken something loose in her chest, and she would not cry at this man's table. Elias Boone did the kindest thing he could have done. He looked at his own plate, and he kept eating, and he pretended not to see. He gave her the privacy of his lowered eyes, until she had it under control again. "Thank you," she said finally, when she could trust her voice. "Ain't nothing to thank a man for, feeding folks. That's the lowest bar there is." He tore off a piece of cornbread. "A man who feeds you that's not a good man. That's just a man. The world set the bar so low that doing the plain decent thing looks like a kindness. That ought to tell you something about the world, not about me." Maddie looked at him across the table. "You think low of yourself, Mr. Boone?" "I think accurate of myself. There's a difference." "No," she said. "I don't believe there is in your case." She picked the fork back up. "A man who thinks accurate of himself would have ridden on this morning. The arithmetic said ride on. You've got 40 days and no money, and the last thing on God's earth you need is another mouth. Accurate said, leave her in the street. You didn't do the accurate thing. So either you're a fool or you're better than your arithmetic, and I've spent enough time around numbers to know you're not a fool." For a second, he did not answer. Then the corner of his mouth moved that ghost of a smile she'd seen in town. "You always argue with a man who's just fed you. Only the ones worth arguing with." She went back to her plate, and this time she ate slow, and the silence between them was not an uneasy silence. It was the kind two people fall into when they've stopped performing for each other. When the plates were clean, Elias stood and stacked them, and Maddie stood to take them from him, and for a moment they both had hold of the same plate. "I'll wash up," she said. "It's my work now. You hired me." "I didn't hire you to wait on me. You hired me to keep house and keep accounts. Dishes are house." She took the plate firm out of his hands. "Sit down, Mr. Boone. Drink your coffee. And while I wash, you're going to do something for me." "What's that?" "You're going to fetch me every book, every ledger, every receipt, every letter from the bank, every scrap of paper with a number on it that you've got in this house." She rolled up her sleeves over the wash basin. "And then you're going to go to bed, because you've been up since before dawn, and you'll be up before dawn again, and I don't need you breathing over my shoulder while I work." He stood there. "You mean to go through the books tonight?" "I mean to start tonight." "It's a mess, Miss Reed, I told you. I never could. Mr. Boone?" She turned from the basin and looked at him, and her face was different now than it had been in town. Sharper, surer, the face of a woman standing on the one patch of ground in the world where she knew exactly what she was doing. "My father ran cattle accounts for 30 years before debt took him. He taught me to read a ledger before he taught me to read scripture. He used to say a man's books are his confession. They tell you every sin he's committed, and every sin's been committed against him if you know how to look. I know how to look." She turned back to the basin. "Now go and fetch me your confession, and then go to sleep." Something in the way she said it moved him to do it. He gathered the books, and there were more than she'd expected. A whole crate of them shoved beside the fireplace, ledgers and bank letters and loose receipts jammed between pages, and he set the crate on the table beside her, and he stood a moment, like he wanted to say something more. "Miss Reed." "Mr. Boone, if there's something bad in there?" He stopped. Started again rougher. "If there's something bad in there, I'd as soon you told me straight. I've had a year of folks telling me things gentle. The banker, the broker, all of 'em real soft and sorry while they take the ground out from under me. I'm sick to death of gentle. Whatever you find, you tell me plain." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I don't know how to tell things any other way." "Good." He went to the door of the back room. He stopped there. There's a lamp with oil enough for a few hours. Don't waste it. Oil costs money. Money you haven't got, I know. Good night. Good night, Miss Reed. She finished the dishes. She dried her hands. And then she pulled the crate close and trimmed the lamp low, and she opened the first ledger, and Maddie Reed went to war. She didn't know it was a war yet. For the first hour, it just looked like a mess. Exactly the mess he'd promised a man's honest, poor record-keeping entries in 3 different hands, where he'd had different hired men do the writing over the years, columns that didn't carry dates out of order. She worked through it patient. She had a stub of pencil and the back pages of her father's own ledger to make her notes on, and she built it up slow, the way her father had taught her line by line, until the shape of the ranch's whole life started to come clear under her hands, and the shape of it was wrong. She found the first wrong thing near midnight, and she sat very still when she found it. It was the spring cattle sale. Elias had driven 112 head down to the broker in the spring that was written plain in his own rough hand, 112 head spring drive to V. Harland broker. And then the price. And the price was wrong. Maddie knew cattle prices. She'd grown up on them. She knew what a head of good range beef went for in a dry year, and what it went for in a wet one, knew the floor and the ceiling and everything between, because her father had drilled it into her across 1,000 suppers. And the price written in Elias Boone's ledger for those 112 head was not a low price. It was not even a bad price. It was a robbery. Victor Harland had paid Elias Boone something near 1/3 of what those cattle were worth. 1/3. Maddie sat there and did the arithmetic 3 times, because she could not believe a man could do it so brazen, could look another man in the eye, and hand him 1/3 of what he was owed, and call it a fair market in a hard year. But that wasn't even the worst of it. That was just the first thread. She pulled it, and the whole ugly cloth started to come apart in her hands, because the spring before that the price had been better. Not good, but better, closer to fair. And the spring before that, fairer still. The prices Victor Harland was paying Elias Boone had been dropping year over year faster than any drought or any market could account for. Like a man slowly tightening a rope. Like he'd been watching and waiting and squeezing a little harder each season, because each season Elias was a little more desperate and a little less able to say no and ride his cattle somewhere else. Maddie reached for the bank letters, and there it was. The other half of the trap. The letters from the bank from a man who signed himself J. Crane on behalf of the Cattlemen's Trust, getting harder and colder year over year, same as the prices. Reminders of the mortgage, notes about the interest. And then in the most recent ones, something that made the hair stand up on Maddie's arms, gentle little suggestions slipped in soft that Mr. Boone might consider selling a portion of his acreage to satisfy the debt, and that a reasonable buyer had expressed interest in the lower pasture and water rights. A reasonable buyer. Maddie didn't have to wonder who the reasonable buyer was. She'd had his polished boot beside her hands in the street that morning. She sat back from the table. The lamp had burned low. Her eyes ached and her back ached, and somewhere outside an owl was calling, and Maddie Reed understood all at once, and completely, that she was not looking at a man who had failed. She was looking at a man who was being murdered. Slow. With ink. The broker bought his cattle for 1/3 of their worth, so Elias could never get ahead. The banker who had to be in on it, no honest bank, let a man's account go this crooked, without a word squeeze the mortgage, so Elias could never catch up. And the two of them together were hurting him season by season, payment by payment, toward one September morning, when he wouldn't be able to pay, and the land would fall to the bank, and the bank would sell it cheap to a reasonable buyer, and Victor Harland would own Boone Ridge for pennies on the dollar. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the drought. It was a plan, a patient evil, perfectly legal-looking plan, and Elias Boone had been living inside it for 3 years without ever seeing the walls. "Lord," Maddie whispered to the empty room, 3 years. They've been at him 3 years. She should have gone to bed. The oil was nearly gone. But she couldn't have slept now if the bed were made of feathers and the house full of music, because there was one more thing nagging at her one entry that didn't fit even the ugly pattern she'd uncovered, and Maddie had never in her life been able to leave a thing that didn't fit. It was a receipt. A loose one slid down between two pages half burned at one corner, like it had been pulled out of a fire. And it was the receipt for that spring cattle sale, but it was the broker's own copy, the one Victor Harlan's office would have written out for its own records. And the number on the broker's receipt was different from the number in Elias's book. Not the price Victor had paid, the price Victor had recorded. On his own copy, in his own office's hand, Victor Harlan had written down the real market price for those 112 head, the full fair honest price, even though he'd only handed Elias a third of it. Maddie's hands had gone cold, because she knew what that meant. She knew exactly what that meant, with the clean, awful certainty of a woman who'd grown up over the books. Victor wasn't just cheating Elias. He was cheating somebody else, too. He was buying low from the rancher and selling high to the market, and writing down the high price in his own records, which meant the stolen difference was going into Victor Harlan's pocket and not onto any honest set of books anywhere. He was skimming. From the Cattle Association, from his own bank partners, from whoever sat above him and trusted his numbers, and this half-burned receipt in Maddie's cold hands was proof of it. Hard proof. The kind that didn't care whether you were a respected businessman or a worthless widow, because it was just numbers, and numbers didn't lie, even when everybody holding them did. He tried to burn it, she breathed. He pulled it back, and he tried to burn it, and it ended up in the crate by mistake. She turned it over in the lamplight, this scrap of paper that was worth more than the whole ranch. He doesn't even know it's here. He doesn't know Elias has it. The lamp guttered. The oil was gone. The flame shrank down to a blue bead and went out, and Maddie sat in the dark with the most dangerous piece of paper in the territory in her two hands, and she did not move for a long time. Then she heard the floorboard. She went still. Somebody was up. Somebody was in the dark of the front room with her, and her heart climbed into her throat before a low voice said, "Couldn't sleep. Saw the lamp go out." Elias. Just Elias, a shape in the dark by the bedroom door. "You been at it all night, Miss Reed. It's near 3 by the moon." "Mr. Boone." She had to stop and steady her voice. "Light a candle. There's something you need to see, and you're not going to want to see it, and you need to see it anyway." He didn't ask questions. He found the candle and struck the match, and the little flame jumped up between them, and in its light he saw her face, and whatever he saw there made him go very still. "It's bad?" he said, not a question. "Sit down, Mr. Boone." "I'd as soon stand." "Sit down." And something in her voice put him in the chair. She told him. She didn't soften it because he'd asked her not to, and because she didn't know how. She laid it out the way she'd found it, thread by thread, the cattle prices dropping year over year faster than any market, the bank letters tightening in time with them, the reasonable buyer who wanted his lower pasture and his water. She watched his face the whole time. She watched the first numb confusion, and then the slow dawning, and then the thing she'd been dreading worst of all, which was the shame. "So I'm a fool," he said quietly when she'd finished. "Is what you're telling me. 3 years he's been making a fool of me right to my face, and I shook his hand every spring and thanked him for the business." "No, I sat in his office. I sat right there in his office and took a third of what my cattle were worth, and I thanked him. Miss Reed, because I thought it was the drought. I thought it was a hard market. I thought everybody was hurting." His voice cracked and he stopped, jaw working, and his big hands had closed into fists on the table. "Every other man my father's age would have seen it. My father would have seen it in a minute. He'd have read those books and known. And I can rope a steer in the dark. Miss Reed, I can set a broke leg on a calf and track a strayed cow over bare rock. But I can't read my own ruin when it's written down right in front of me, and that makes me—" "A man who was robbed by a thief," Maddie said, "is not a fool. He's a man who was robbed by a thief." "It's the same." "It is not the same, and you'll stop saying it is." She said it sharp enough that he looked up. "Listen to me, Elias Boone. A man can lose a ranch with a pen just as fast as he can lose it with a gun, and faster and quieter, and the law'll even shake the thief's hand on the way out. You weren't robbed because you were foolish. You were robbed because a clever, wicked man found the one weakness you had and used it for 3 years patient as a spider. That's not your shame. That's his." She leaned across the table, and her voice it was fierce and low. "And I'll tell you something else. He made a mistake. After 3 years of never making one, he finally made one, and I'm holding it." She set the half-burned receipt on the table between them in the candlelight. "What is it?" Elias said. "It's the day," Maddie said, "that Victor Harlan stops being a respected businessman and starts being a thief that even his own partners want to hang. Because he's not just stealing from you, Mr. Boone. He's stealing from everyone above him, too. And the man who steals from the men below him is safe. But the man who steals from the men above him—" She tapped the receipt. "That man the law will move heaven and earth to destroy. And we are holding the proof." Elias looked at the scrap of paper. He looked at her. And slowly, the shame went out of his face, and something else came into it. Something she hadn't seen there yet. Something hard and alive. "What do we do?" he said. "We." She caught the word and held it. "Not what do I do. Not what do you do. We. First," Maddie said, "you go to bed. Both of us do. Because we can't fight a thing this big, tired and half-blind, and there's nothing more to be done before sunup." She closed her hand over the receipt and held it to her chest. "Second, tomorrow we copy this, twice, 3 times. We make copies and we hide them in 3 different places, so that if anything happens to one, a fire, a theft, anything, the proof survives. Victor Harland already tried to burn this once. We don't give him a second chance. And third," Maddie's eyes were very steady in the candlelight. "Third," she said, "I write letters. To the county judge, to the cattle association he's been skimming, to every rancher in 3 counties he's been buying low from. Because I promise you, Mr. Boone, you are not the only one. A man doesn't build a scheme this smooth on one ranch. There are others. And once they know they were robbed too, once they know it wasn't. The drought wasn't the market, wasn't their own bad luck, but one man's deliberate hand in all their pockets." She set her jaw. "Then it stops being your fight alone. Then it's everybody's. And one rich man, however clever, cannot stand against a whole country of angry, honest people who finally figured out who's been picking their pockets." Elias Boone was quiet a long moment. "You worked all this out," he said. "Tonight, in one night, while I was sleeping. My father didn't leave me much, Mr. Boone." She tucked the receipt and her father's ledger together against her chest. "He left me debt and a hard name in a town that spat on me when he died. But he left me this." She touched her own temple. "And it turns out this is worth more than the brooch I sold for a room I never used. So no, he didn't leave me much. But he left me enough to save your ranch. If you'll let me. If I'll let you." Elias gave a short, rough laugh, the first real laugh she'd heard out of him. "Miss Reed, I'd be the worst fool in this territory if I tried to stop you now." "Then we're agreed." She stood and gathered the candle. "Go to bed, Mr. Boone. We've got 40 days to save your home, and I mean to use every one of them." He stood too. At the door of the back room he paused the way he had, before the way he seemed to always pause when there was something he didn't quite have the words for. "Miss Reed." "Mr. Boone?" "This morning you walked into this country with 1 carpetbag and a book," he said slowly. "And the whole town said you were worthless. Worth less than a lame horse, that's what he said. Right there in the street. I remember, I was there. I just want it on the record." His tired eyes found hers in the dark. "Before sundown, you found the thing that's been killing my family's land for 3 years. The thing the bank missed. The thing I missed. The thing 2 grown men with all their schooling never caught. You found it in one night on a stub of candle after walking up a mountain on an empty stomach." He nodded once slow. "I don't know what worthless means anymore, ma'am, but I know it ain't you. And I aim to make sure this whole country knows it too before we're through." And then, because he'd said more than he was comfortable saying, he ducked into the back room and shut the door, and Maddie Reed stood alone in the dark front room of a failing ranch with a candle in one hand and a fortune of paper in the other. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not feel worthless at all. She blew out the candle. She lay down on the cot he'd made up for her by the cold fireplace. And though her body was bone-tired, her mind would not stop turning, building the letters, she'd write the copies, she'd make the careful patient siege, she'd lay against the man who'd called her worth less than a lame horse. She fell asleep just before dawn, and she slept hard, and she did not dream. The days after that ran fast and full. They fell into a rhythm without ever sitting down to plan one. Elias was up before the sun out to the thin cattle in the failing creek, and the 100 hard chores a dying ranch demanded, and Maddie was up just after him, the coffee already going by the time he came in from the first round. They ate together every morning at the table, full plates, no scraps, and over those breakfasts they made their war plans. She copied the burned receipt first 3 times in her careful clean hand, and they hid the copies the way she'd said one wrapped in oilcloth and buried in a tin under the floor of the smokehouse. One slid behind a loose stone in the chimney, and one she sewed flat into the lining of her father's ledger, which never left her person. The original she kept safest of all in a place she didn't even tell Elias, because as she said, "What you don't know, Mr. Boone, you can't be made to tell." Then came the letters, dozens of them. She wrote until her hand cramped and the ink ran low, and Elias rode the copies down to the valley to post them at a town 2 days off rather than the hometown, because as Maddie pointed out, the home postmaster very likely answered to Victor Harland, same as everybody else. She wrote to the county judge, laying out the fraud plain and offering the proof. She wrote to the Cattle Association. Victor skimmed from telling them one of their own brokers had his hand in their pocket. And she wrote, this was the part that took the most work, to rancher after rancher across 3 counties, every name she could find of a man who'd sold cattle through Victor Harland's office. And to each she asked one simple question: did the price you were paid these last 3 years ever feel low to you? Lower than the drought alone could explain. If it did, you were not imagining it, and you were not alone, and I can prove it. The answers started coming back inside 2 weeks, and every one of them said the same thing. Yes, lower than it should have been. I thought it was the market. I thought it was bad luck. I thought it was me. It was never them. Maddie spread the answer letters out on the table one evening and counted them and looked up at Elias across the lamplight. 9, she said. 9 ranchers so far, and more coming. 9 families he's been bleeding the same way he bled you. 9 men who thought they were just unlucky. She put her hand flat on the stack. You know what 9 angry ranchers are, Mr. Boone. 9 angry ranchers who used to think they were alone. What are they? They're a flood. Her eyes shone in the lamplight. And Victor Harland built his whole house in a dry riverbed and never once looked up at the sky. But it was in the 3rd week that the thing happened, which changed everything between them. Not the war, but the other thing. The quiet thing that had started on the road and been building ever since, over 100 shared breakfasts and 100 lamplit nights bent over the books. A calf got caught in the low creek, half drowned in a mud sink, bawling its fool mother bawling back from the bank, and Elias went in after it up to his chest in the muck, and Maddie ran down from the house when she heard the noise and went in after him without a second's thought, hauling on the calf's hindquarters while he worked its front legs free, the 2 of them filthy and soaked and laughing. She realized later, the both of them, hauling a stupid calf out of the mud and laughing like children. And when the calf finally came free with a great sucking pop, they both went over backward into the shallows, and Maddie came up with mud in her hair, and the calf scrambling away to its mother, and Elias Boone sitting there in the creek looking at her, just looking at her, mud-streaked and breathless and grinning, his long hair come loose and dripping. What? She said. Nothing. But he didn't look away. You're staring, Mr. Boone. I am. He didn't deny it. That was the thing about him. He never denied a plain truth. I'm sorry, it's just... He stopped. He looked at the water. My father built this ranch with my mother working right alongside him, up to her elbows in everything, same as him. After she passed, he never had that again. Worked it alone 20 years. And I figured that was just how it was for a Boone. You worked the land alone, and you died on it alone, and that was the bargain. He looked back at her. And then a worthless widow known would feed walks into my creek to pull a calf out of the mud and laughs while she does it, and He stopped himself. And you what? Maddie said. Quiet now. The laughing gone out of both of them, replaced by something with more weight. And I remembered what it looked like, he said. A ranch with 2 people on it instead of 1. I'd flat forgot what it looked like. And it turns out I missed it more than I knew. Maddie sat very still in the cold creek water with the mud drying on her face, and her heart was doing something complicated in her chest, something she had sworn off doing ever again after her father died, and the world taught her what it cost a woman to need anybody. Mr. Boone, she said carefully, I came here to save your ranch. Not to. I know it. I have a job to do and it's not finished. And there's a man down in that valley who wants to take everything you have, and I will not be distracted from stopping him. I won't. There's too much at stake. I know that too. He got to his feet in the creek, and he reached down a muddy hand to help her up, and she took it. I'm not asking you for anything, Miss Reed. I wouldn't. You said it plain the first day you work for your place you don't beg for one, and you don't take charity, and I'd never insult you by offering you a feeling like it was charity. He pulled her up to standing. He didn't let go of her hand right away. I'm just telling you a true thing, because you told me to always tell you things plain. The true thing is this. Whatever happens with the ranch, whether we win or whether Harlan takes it and I lose everything my family ever built, I'm glad you walked up that mountain. Even if it all burns down, I'm glad you came, that's all. That's the whole of it. And then he let go of her hand and turned and slogged up out of the creek to go check on the fool calf, and left Maddie Reed standing in the cold water with her heart pounding and the mud drying on her face, and a feeling in her chest she had no column to write down in any ledger she owned. She stood there a long while. Then she climbed up out of the creek, and she wrung out her skirts, and she went back up to the house, and she sat down at the table, and she pulled the books toward her, because the books were the work, and the work was the thing she could trust, and there was a man coming to take everything, and 40 days had become 26. She did not let herself think about Elias Boone's face in the creek. She thought about Victor Harland instead. And it was that same night late, the lamp low, Elias long since gone to his bed, that Maddie heard the horse on the road. She heard it, and she went still, pencil frozen, over the page. One rider. Coming slow and careful in the dark. No lantern the way a man rides when he doesn't want to be seen coming. Her first thought was Harland, and her hand went to the lamp to put it out. And then she stopped, because a single careful rider in the dark was not how a confident man like Victor Harland traveled. Victor would come in daylight in a good coat with that smile. This was somebody who didn't want to be caught coming. The horse stopped at the bottom of the yard. There was a long silence, and then a voice came up out of the dark toward the house, low, tight, frightened. Miss Reed, the accounts woman, you in there? A pause. The creak of a man dismounting. My name's Caleb Stoss. I clerk for Victor Harland. I gotta talk to you, miss, before I lose my nerve and ride back, and you gotta listen quick because if anybody knew I was up here, he'd... The voice broke off, came back lower. He's planning something. For the hearing. Something that ain't in any book you found. And it's coming a lot sooner than September, miss. He moved the date. He moved the whole thing up, and you got no idea, and I can't stand by and watch it no more. Maddie was already on her feet. She had the door open before he finished talking. Get inside, Maddie said. Off the yard, now. If you mean to talk, you'll do it where the road can't hear you. Caleb Stoss came up the steps fast. A thin, stooped man with ink still ground into his fingers. Hat crushed in his 2 hands, eyes jumping to the windows like he expected a rider to come up the road any second. She pulled him in and shut the door and threw the bar across it, and only then did she turn the lamp up enough to see his face. It was the face of a man who hadn't slept in days. You woke this house, she said. It'll be awake in a moment. So talk fast, Mr. Stoss, while it's just me. You said he moved the date. The hearing. Caleb's voice shook. The bank hearing on the Boone note. You think it's September the 1st. It ain't. He went to the judge to Crane the banker, who's got the judge's ear, and they moved it up. It's set for the end of this week, miss. 5 days. He's calling the note early. He can't call a note early. There's a date. There's a contract. There's a clause. Caleb swallowed. There's always a clause, miss, with Mr. Harland. A clause that says if the bank judges the borrowers gone insolvent, gone past saving, they can call the whole sum due at once. And Crane's about to judge Boone insolvent. This week. Then the whole $1,100 comes due Friday, and Boone can't pay $1,100 by Friday. No more than he could fly. And when he can't, the land falls to the bank. And Monday morning, Mr. Harland buys it off the bank for back taxes. He's got the paper half drawn already. I copied it myself. His voice cracked. I've been copying his thieving 4 years, miss, and I told myself it weren't my sin, I just held the pen. But I can't tell myself that no more. The bedroom door opened. Elias filled the frame shirtless, the gun belt already in his hand, though not yet buckled, a man who'd heard a strange voice in his house and come ready. Who's this? He said. Easy, Mr. Boone. Matty stepped between them, palm out. This is Caleb Stoss. He clerks for Harland. And he's just ridden up a mountain in the dark at risk of his own neck to tell us Harland's moved the hearing up to Friday. Elias went still. Friday. 5 days, Caleb said. I'm sorry, Mr. Boone. I held the pen on a lot of it. I owe you better than this, and I know it. But it's the best I can do now. I came to warn you, and to... He reached into his coat with a shaking hand and drew out a folded paper. And to bring you this. It's the bank's draft judgment. The one Crane means to read out Friday. The one that calls you insolvent. I copied it before I wrote out. Elias didn't move to take it. He looked at the thin, frightened clerk standing in his front room, and his jaw worked, and Matty watched a whole war go across his face, a year of being squeezed, of being shamed, of shaking the hands of the men who were robbing him. And here was one of those very hands held out now in the dark. You held the pen, Elias said slowly. All of it. The cattle prices, the bank letters. You wrote them. I did. You knew, the whole time. You knew what they were doing to me, and you wrote it down neat, and you went home and slept. I did, Mr. Boone. Caleb didn't look away, and Matty gave him credit for that. I won't tell you I didn't. I'd be lying, and you've had enough men lie to you. I knew. I told myself it weren't my place. I told myself a poor man can't afford a conscience. I told myself 100 things. His voice dropped. And then I watched what they did to her in the street, to Miss Reed. I was there in the crowd with the rest of them. I watched a woman go down in the dirt for her bread, and I watched Mr. Harland laugh, and something in me just broke. I'm done, Mr. Boone. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just couldn't hold the pen one more day. There was a long, taut silence. Then Elias Boone crossed the room, and Matty's breath caught. She didn't know which way he'd go, and she didn't think he knew either, and he reached out, and he took the folded paper from Caleb's shaking hand. I won't pretend it's all square between us, Elias said. It ain't. You did me a wrong, and a warning don't wipe it clean. He unfolded the draft and looked at it. But a man who rides up a mountain in the dark to do the right thing late is still a better man than the one who never does it at all. Sit down, Mr. Stoss. Miss Reed's going to want to ask you 100 questions, and you're going to answer every one. Matty was already pulling out a chair, already pulling a clean page toward her, the pencil in her hand. Sit, she said, and start at the beginning. 4 years, every scheme, every name. I want all of it. And Caleb Stoss sat down at the table of the man he'd helped to ruin, and he told them everything. It poured out of him like a wound finally lanced. 4 years of it. How Victor Harland had come into the county, polished and rich, and bought his way into a partnership at the Cattlemen's Trust. How he'd looked at the mountain ranches, the small ones, the proud ones, the ones with good water and no cash reserve, and seen not neighbors, but prey. How he'd worked the long, patient con buying their cattle low through his brokerage and squeezing their notes hard through his bank, Two hands of the same body until one by one the ranchers cracked and sold cheap, and Victor bought their land for pennies. "How many?" Maddie said, writing fast. "How many ranches has he taken this way?" "4 already. The Pruitt place, the old Garza spread, the Dahlgren claim with the spring on it, and the Webb ranch last fall that was a bad one, miss. Old man Webb hung himself in his own barn the week the bank took it, left a wife and a boy." Caleb's hand shook. "I wrote the foreclosure on the Webb place. I wrote it the morning before he did it. I think on that most nights." Elias's hands had closed into fists on the table. "And Boone Ridge is meant to be the 5th, Maddie said. "The 5th, and the prize, miss. Of all of 'em, Boone Ridge has the best water. That creek runs from a high spring that don't go dry even in a year like this. Everybody down valley needs that water. Mr. Harland gets Boone Ridge. He controls the water for half the valley, and then he don't just own 4 ranches, he owns everybody who's left because they all got to come to him to drink." Caleb looked at Elias. "That's why he wants your place so bad he moved heaven and earth to take it early. It ain't about your cattle, Mr. Boone. It never was. It's about the water under your land." Maddie set her pencils down. She'd known it was bad. She'd known it was a scheme known. There were others known. Victor was a thief. But this, 4 ruined families. A man dead in his barn, a plan to choke a whole valley by the throat, through the one thing nobody could live without. This was bigger and colder than anything she'd let herself imagine, and she sat with it a moment, the weight of it. Then she picked the pencil back up, because the work was the work. "Mr. Stoss," she said, "I'm going to ask you the most important question I'll ask you tonight, and I need you to think hard before you answer. The skimming. The part where Harland buys low from the ranchers and sells high to the market and pockets the difference without ever putting it on the association's books." She watched his face. "He's stealing from the ranchers, yes, but he's also stealing from his own partners at the trust, from the cattle association, from the men above him, isn't he?" Caleb went pale. How do you know about that?" "Because I found a receipt he tried to burn." Maddie leaned forward. "Answer me. Is he skimming from the association?" "Yes." It came out a whisper. "Tens of thousands over 4 years. The association thinks they're getting the broker's honest cut. They ain't. He's been bleeding them same as the ranchers, only quieter because the association's got money to lose and don't watch every dollar. He's the most trusted broker they got. They'd never think to check his numbers against the real sale prices, because why would Victor Harland, rich as he is, steal nickels?" Caleb shook his head. "But it ain't nickels when you do it for 4 years across 5 counties. It's a fortune. And it's hid in his private books, the green ones, the ones he keeps in the office safe and never lets nobody see." "The office safe," Maddie repeated. "Miss Reed." Caleb's voice dropped to nearly nothing. "I know the combination. I'm the one writes the entries. I'm the only man besides Harland himself who's ever opened that safe." The room went dead quiet. Maddie and Elias looked at each other across the table. And in that look passed a whole understanding, the kind that doesn't need words, that the thing they'd been building, the careful, patient siege of letters and copies, and waiting for September, had just been blown apart, and that something far more dangerous and far more total had just walked in the door and sat down at their table. "You're telling me," Maddie said slowly, "that the green books in that safe, the real books, the ones with the stolen fortune written plain, you could put your hand on them." "I'm telling you, I'm the only man living who could," Caleb said. "But miss, you don't understand what you're asking. If I open that safe and take them books, there's no going back. Not for me. He'll know it was me. There's only 2 men know the combination, and one of 'em's him. The minute them books go missing, I'm a dead man. He's got hard men on his payroll. I've seen what they do." He was shaking now openly. "I came up here to warn you. I didn't come to die." "Then don't," Elias said. Both of them looked at him. "Don't die." Elias said again, quiet. "Don't ride back. There's nothing for you down there but a man who'd cut your throat the second he didn't need your pen no more, and you know it because you just told us he's done worse to better men. So don't go back." He nodded toward the back of the house. "There's a room. It ain't much. But there's a roof and a door, and any man who'd kill you would have to come up my mountain and through me to do it, and I'm a harder thing to come through than you'd think. You stay here, Mr. Stoss. You stay here, and tomorrow we figure out how to get them books without it costing your life." Caleb stared at him. "After what I'd done to you, you'd take me in." "A woman walked up this mountain 3 weeks ago with everybody saying she was worthless," Elias said. "She's about to save 5 ranches and break a man even the bank's afraid of. I've learned my lesson about who's worth taking in and who ain't. Stay." Caleb Stoss put his face in his ink-stained hands, and his shoulders shook, and neither of them said anything, and after a while he got himself under control and lifted his head, and something had settled in him. "There might be a way," he said, "to get the books without it being on my head. But it's a gamble, and the timing's got to be perfect, and it's got to happen before Friday, and if it goes wrong—" He looked between them. "If it goes wrong, we all hang. You understand me. Not just me. All 3 of us." "Tell us the way," Maddie said. He told them, and it was good. It was clever. The kind of clever that comes from a man who spent 4 years inside another man's machine and knows exactly where the gears are loose. The hearing was Friday. Victor would ride into town Thursday evening to make his final arrangements with Crane. The banker and his office would sit empty Thursday night with only the night clerk dozing at the front, and the night clerk was Caleb. If Caleb opened the safe Thursday night and took the green books, and if at that same hour Victor was seen in the saloon arranging his triumph, then it would look, if they were careful, if they laid the ground right, like Victor's own carelessness, like the books had been taken by a thief in the night, while their owner caroused, and not like an inside betrayal. And once those books were in Maddie's hands, with the burned receipt to match them, the whole thing came apart. The skimming, the fraud, the murder by foreclosure of 5 families, all of it, in Victor Harlan's own hand. "And we take it all," Maddie said, "not to Crane's hearing where Crane's bought and the judge is in Crane's pocket, but over their heads," Caleb finished, "to the association itself, to the men Harlan's been robbing, and to the federal circuit court, miss, not the county, the federal court where Harlan's got no friends and no reach. You put them green books in front of a federal judge and the cattle association both, and it don't matter how respected Victor Harlan is. A thief's a thief when his own hand convicts him." Maddie sat back. She looked at the 2 men at her table. The wounded cowboy who'd taken in everyone the world threw away, and the frightened clerk who'd finally found his spine 3 years too late, and she felt the whole shape of the thing come clear in her mind, every piece, every risk, every move. "All right," she said. "Then here's how we'll do it." She laid it out. She'd thought faster than either of them, and they both saw it, and neither of them argued. Caleb would ride back down before dawn, so his absence was never noticed. That was the hardest part, sending him back into the lion's mouth. But it had to be, or the whole plan died. He'd work his shifts normal as ever. Thursday night, he'd open the safe and take the green books. He'd ride them up the mountain. And Friday morning, while Victor walked into the county hearing, fat and confident, expecting to swallow Boone Ridge whole, Maddie and Elias would not be there to lose. They'd be riding hard the other way for the federal courthouse. 2 days off with the green books and the burned receipt, and 9 signed letters from cheated ranchers, and 1 clerk's full sworn confession to bring the whole house down on Victor Harlan's head from a direction he never thought to guard. "He'll win the hearing," Elias said slowly. "Friday, with us not there, he'll take the ranch." "He'll think he's taken the ranch," Maddie said, "for about 3 days. And then a federal marshal will ride into his town and arrest him at his own breakfast table, and every acre he's stolen will come back, and every family he's ruined will have their day, and the Webb boy will get his father's land back, even if he can't get his father." Her voice had gone hard and cold and certain. "Let him have his 3 days, Mr. Boone. Let him crow. The higher he climbs Friday, the farther he falls Monday." It was a long, quiet moment. "You're a fearsome woman, Miss Reed," Caleb said softly. "I don't mind telling you. When Mr. Harlan called you worthless in that street, I thought, well, I thought he was right. God forgive me, I thought he was right same as everybody. I never been so glad to be wrong in my life. Get some sleep, Mr. Stoss. You ride before dawn. Maddie stood. And Mr. Stoss. She stopped him at the door of the back room. Thursday night, when you open that safe, your hand's going to shake. You're going to think about running. You're going to think about a man dead in his barn, and you're going to be sure you're next. She held his eyes. When that happens, think about the web boy instead. You think about the 4 families already ruined, and the whole valley about to be choked. You think about every poor soul who ever got told they were worth less than a lame horse. And then you open that safe. You hear me? Caleb Stoss nodded slow. I hear you, miss. He rode out an hour before dawn, a thin, stooped shadow going careful down the mountain, and Maddie and Elias stood on the porch and watched him go until the dark swallowed him. You think he'll do it, Elias said. Or you think the second he gets back down there and gets scared, he runs, or worse, he goes to Harland and sells us out to save his own neck. I don't know, Maddie said honestly. A frightened man's the hardest thing in the world to predict. He might do the bravest thing you ever saw. He might do the worst. She wrapped her arms around herself against the dawn cold. That's the gamble, Mr. Boone. We've put all our weight on a man who already broke once. He could break again. And if he does, he could break the wrong way, and then it's not Friday's hearing we lose. It's everything. Elias was quiet a moment. Then why'd you bet on him? Because a man who rides up a mountain in the dark to confess his sins, Maddie said, is a man who's already decided he'd rather die clean than live dirty. I'm betting he meant it. She turned to go in. And because we've got no other play, Mr. Boone. Friday's coming whether we like it or not. We bet on Caleb, or we sit here and watch you lose your home Friday afternoon with nothing in our hands but letters and hope. I'd rather gamble and lose than sit still and lose. Wouldn't you? I would. He looked down the empty dark road. I just don't like betting your neck on it. Mine fine. I've had a year of not much caring what happens to mine. But yours. He stopped. Mr. Boone, you ride to that federal court with stolen books and a thief like Harland behind you, Elias said. And it ain't just the law that's the danger. He's got hard men. Stoss said so. If Harland figures out before Monday what's coming, if he gets even a whisper of it, he won't wait for marshals. He'll send men up this road or down that one, and they won't be carrying paper. He turned to her, and his tired gray eyes were not tired now. I can't let you ride into that. I won't. You can't let me... Maddie's chin came up. That came out wrong. It surely did. I mean... Elias dragged a hand through his loose hair, frustrated a man unused to having this many words to find. I mean, I've buried about everything I ever cared about, Miss Reed. My mother, my father, this ranch near enough. I've got real good at burying things. And somewhere in the last 3 weeks without my asking it to you, got to be a thing I'd have to bury. And I find I can't do it. I haven't got it in me to bury one more thing. So when you talk about riding into danger so light, like your neck don't matter, it does something to me I can't hardly stand. He stopped breathing a little hard, having said far more than he meant to. Maddie stood very still. The dawn was coming up gray behind the mountains, and the cold was in her bones, but she didn't feel it, because something warm and terrifying had opened up in her chest, at his words. And she'd sworn off exactly this. She'd sworn it on her father's grave, never again to be a woman who needed a man, because need was a debt, and debts got called, and she'd watched what the calling did. Mr. Boone, she said, and her voice wasn't steady. I told you the first day, I came here to do a job. I work for my place. I know what you said. He took a step toward her on the porch. And I'm not asking you to unsay it. I'm not asking you for anything. I told you I'd never insult you that way. Another step. I'm just telling you a true thing because that's our bargain, you and me. We tell each other things plain. And the plain true thing is somewhere between the street and this porch. You stopped being a job to me, and I don't rightly know when it happened, and I can't make it stop, and I'm not sure I want to. He was close now. That's all. You don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know it before we ride into something that might kill us both, because if it does kill us, I didn't want to die with it unsaid. I've got enough unsaid things in the ground already. Maddie looked up at him. At the dust still in his beard, and the tiredness gone out of his eyes, and the raw, plain honesty of him. This man who'd stood beside her, in a street full of people who hated her, who'd put a full plate in front of a starving stranger, and called it nothing, who'd taken in the very clerk who'd helped ruin him. Because the man rode up a mountain to do right. And she did the thing she'd sworn she'd never do again. She let herself need him, just for a moment. Just long enough to reach up and put her hand flat against his chest over the heart she could feel going hard and fast under her palm. "Then I'll tell you a plain thing back," she said quietly. "I stopped being able to think of you as just my employer about a week ago somewhere over the books. And it scared me worse than Victor Harland ever did, because I know what it costs a woman to need somebody Elias Boone. I watched it cost my mother everything. I swore I'd never pay it." Her hand pressed against his chest. "But I'm standing here on your porch at dawn, about to ride into something that might kill us both, and I find I'd rather pay the cost and have these weeks than have stayed safe and never walked up your mountain at all. So there, that's my plain thing. Now we've both got it said, and neither of us has to die with it in the ground." For a long moment, neither of them moved. And then Elias Boone lifted one big careful hand, the hand that could rope a steer in the dark, and set a calf's broken leg and laid it against the side of her face, gentle as anything. And Maddie closed her eyes and leaned into it, and the dawn came up over the mountains around them, and for one held breath, the whole hard world fell away. And there was only the two of them on the porch, and the warmth of his hand, and the thing that had been building since a dusty street 3 weeks ago finally quietly standing, acknowledged between them. It lasted only a moment, because that was when they heard the riders on the road. Not one careful horse in the dark, many. Coming up fast and hard from the valley, the drum of hooves carrying clear on the dawn air, and both their heads snapped toward the sound at once. Elias's hand dropped from her face. "That's not Stoss." No. Maddie's heart had gone to ice. "Stoss rode out an hour ago. Stoss is one horse going down." She counted the hoofbeats, and her stomach dropped. "That's 4, 5. Coming up." Elias was already moving, already reaching for the rifle inside the door. "Get in the house, bar the door, get the books, and get them out the back window and run for the tree line. Elias. Elias. Go Maddie." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Whatever this is, they can't get the proof. The proof is everything. If they take me, fine, but they can't take the books. You hear? You run and you keep running and you get to that federal court without me if you have to." But it was already too late to run. The riders came up over the rise and into the yard in the gray dawn light. 5 of them, hard men on lathered horses, and at the front of them, sitting his fine horse in his fine coat, with no smile at all on his face, this time was Victor Harland. He looked at the two of them standing on the porch. He looked at Elias with the rifle half raised. And he looked longest at Maddie at her hand that had just been against the cowboy's chest, and something cold and knowing moved across his polished face. "Well," Victor Harland said softly into the dawn quiet, "isn't this a tender little scene?" He swung down off his horse unhurried, while his 4 hard men sat their saddles with their hands resting easy near their guns. "I'd hoped to settle our business at Friday's hearing, Boone, like civilized men, but a little bird told me last night that you and your accountswoman have been writing some very interesting letters to some very inconvenient people." His eyes found Maddie's and held them. "So I thought I'd ride up and have a look at exactly what you've got in that little book of yours, Miss Reed, before it causes me any more trouble than it already has." And Maddie understood with a sick lurch that somewhere down that mountain in the dark, the gamble had already gone wrong, that someone had talked, that Victor knew that he'd come not for Friday, but for now, and that the half-burned receipt and 3 weeks of work and the only proof that could save 5 families was sitting in a ledger not 10 feet away in a house surrounded by 5 armed men with the sun barely up. "Put the rifle down, Boone," Victor said pleasantly. "You've got 1 gun. I've got 5. The arithmetic hasn't changed just because you found yourself a clever woman. It's still arithmetic, and it still favors me." Elias did not put the rifle down. "You're on my land, Harland," he said. Uninvited. 5 men with guns. A court would call that whatever it wanted, but I'd call it trespass. And I'd be inside my rights to do something about it. You'd be dead inside 2 seconds of trying. Victor said it without heat, the way a man states a fact about the weather. And then I'd have a sad story for the marshal the desperate failing rancher gone mad with debt drew on me and my men in his own yard. Choice. They'd believe it, Boone. They believe me about everything. That's rather the whole point of being me. He took a step toward the porch. Now, the book. Miss Reed's little ledger. Hand it over, and I'll ride back down this mountain, and we'll settle the rest civilized on Friday. Make me reach for it, and we'll settle it all right here in the dirt, and I promise you nobody walks away from that but me. Maddie's mind was running fast and cold. The book in her father's ledger, the one with the receipt copy sewn into the lining, was sitting on the table just inside the door. If Victor got his hands on it, he'd burn it, and he'd think he'd won, and he'd never know about the 2 other copies hidden in the smokehouse and the chimney. Never know about the 9 signed letters already in the mail. 2 days gone. Never know about Caleb Stoss. Caleb. The writers were 5. Victor and 4 hard men. Caleb wasn't among them, which meant Caleb hadn't sold them out. Or hadn't only sold them out. Maddie filed that away in a heartbeat. Somebody had talked Victor knew about the letters, but it wasn't Caleb riding at his side, and that distinction might be the only thing they had left. "You want the book?" Maddie said. She stepped forward past Elias, putting herself at the front of the porch where Victor could see her plain. "Then let's talk about the book, Mr. Harland, because I don't think you've thought this through, and I'd hate for a clever man to make a careless mistake." "Maddie," Elias started. "I've got this Mr. Boone." She didn't take her eyes off Victor. "Let's talk plain, you and me. You rode up here at dawn with 5 guns because somebody told you we've been writing letters. That's true. We have. But think, Mr. Harland. Think like the careful man you are. If those letters were nothing, if they were the empty scribbling of a worthless widow like you called me in the street, would you have ridden up a mountain at dawn to stop them?" She let that sit. "You wouldn't. You'd have laughed. You'd have read them out at the saloon for sport. The fact that you're standing in this yard with hired guns tells me you already know exactly what's in that book, and it tells me you're afraid of it." Victor's jaw tightened just slightly. "I'm not afraid of a woman's accounting." "No?" Maddie tilted her head. "Then ride back down. Go on. Let Friday come. Win your hearing. Take the ranch. If my little book is nothing, it can't hurt you, can it?" She watched his face. "But you won't, because you know it's not nothing. You know I found the cattle prices. You know I found the bank letters. And—" She let her voice drop soft and lethal. "You know I found the receipt you tried to burn." Victor Harland went very still. It was only a flicker. A man as practiced as Victor didn't let his face fall. But Maddie had spent 3 weeks reading his thieving by lamplight, and she knew the shape of his guilt better than he did, and she saw the flicker, saw the exact half-second where the receipt you tried to burn landed like a blade between his ribs. "There is no receipt," he said. "There's the broker's copy of the spring sale," Maddie said. 112 head to V. Harland, with the real market price written in your own office's hand. Not the third you paid Mr. Boone. The full price. The price you reported to the market while you robbed the rancher." She took another step. "Do you know what that paper proves, Mr. Harland? It doesn't just prove you cheated Elias Boone. Half this territory cheats somebody. That's hardly worth a hanging. No. That receipt proves you've been skimming the difference, pocketing it, hiding it off the association's books. It proves you've been stealing not from the ranchers beneath you, they'd never catch you, but from the cattle association above you, from your own partners, from the men with money and lawyers in reach." Her voice was iron now. "And those are the men, Mr. Harland, who hang a thief, not for cheating the poor. The poor don't matter to them, for cheating them." The yard had gone dead silent. Even the hard men on their horses were watching now, not the cowboy with the rifle, but the woman in the gray dress. Victor's voice, when it came, had lost all its silk. "You don't have that receipt. Are you sure?" Maddie smiled thin and cold. You tried to burn it. It ended up in Mr. Boone's account crate by mistake, slipped down between 2 pages half charred. You never even knew. You've been sleeping fine for months, thinking the only copy of your ruin was ash, and it was sitting in a leaking ranch house the whole time waiting for somebody who knew how to read it to walk up the mountain. She spread her hands. And then somebody did. Then give it to me. Victor's composure cracked at the edges. Whatever it's worth, name it. I'm a rich man, Miss Reed. I can make a worthless widow comfortable for life. A house, money, a name. You could walk into any town in this territory with your head up. I can give you everything that street took from you. Just give me the receipt. And there it was, the thing Maddie had been waiting for. The offer. 3 times in town she'd been offered charity with a price, and she'd turned it down every time. And here was the biggest charity of all the whole world handed back to her for 1 piece of paper. Mr. Harland, she said, 3 days ago I'd have told you something proud and refused you flat. But I've gotten smarter, so I'll tell you the truth instead. She looked him dead in the eye. I wouldn't sell you that receipt for every dollar you've stolen, because the day I take your money is the day I become you, a person who decided their comfort was worth more than 5 ruined families. And I've met those families now, Mr. Harland. I've read their letters. I know about old man Webb and his barn. I know about his boy. You can't pay me enough to step over them. There isn't enough money in the world. Victor's face had gone white, then red. Then I'll take it off your corpse, he said, and the pleasant was gone entirely now, the real Victor showing through at last, the cold thing under the silk. He half turned to his men. The book's in the house. Burn the house. Burn it with both of them in it if they won't come out. The marshal gets the story about the mad rancher and his... That'd be a mistake, Mr. Harland. The new voice came from the side of the house. Everybody turned, and Maddie's heart leapt into her throat, because there at the corner of the porch, having come up the back way through the trees, stood Caleb Stoss, pale shaking, but standing, and in his ink-stained hands he held not a gun, but a stack of green books bound with twine and a leather satchel. Caleb, Victor breathed. What in God's name? I didn't ride down this morning, Mr. Harland. Caleb's voice trembled, but it didn't stop. I led on like I was going to, but I doubled back through the high trees, and I've been sitting up in them rocks since before light watching the road. And when you and your men rode up when I heard what you come to do. He swallowed hard. I rode down ahead of you in the night, Mr. Harland, while you were still drinking at the Bell, sure of your Friday. I went to your office, I opened your safe, and I took your green books, the real ones. 4 years of it in your own hand. He held them up the twine, cutting into his shaking fingers. It's all here. Every dollar you skimmed, every ranch, Webb, Pruitt, Garza, Dahlgren, and Boone Ridge half drawn for Monday. It's all right here in my hands. The silence that fell was the silence of a man watching the ground open under his feet. You opened my safe, Victor said slowly. I'm the only man besides you who could. You made sure of that. You never trusted nobody but the clerk, too poor and too scared to ever cross you. Caleb's voice broke and steadied. Well, turns out the clerk had a conscience after all. It just took him 4 years and a woman in the dust to find it. Victor's hand moved toward his coat. Shoot him. Shoot the clerk, take the books. You shoot him. Maddie cut in fast and loud. And you've got 2 problems. Mr. Harland, not 1. Because Caleb Stoss didn't ride straight up here with those books. Did you, Caleb? No, miss. Caleb's eyes flicked to her, catching her lead. I didn't. Tell him where you stopped. I stopped at the Webb place, Caleb said. It's on the road up. The widow Webb's still living in the cabin there, even though the bank took the land. Mr. Harland never bothered to throw her out, on account of it looks bad to evict a hanged man's widow before you've got a buyer. So she's there, her and the boy. And I stopped and I told her everything. I showed her the book with her husband's name in it, the foreclosure I wrote the morning before he died, and the skim that drove him to it. And I left her a copy of the worst pages. His voice firmed. So even if you kill all three of us right here in this yard, Mr. Harlan, the widow Webb has got proof of what you did to her man. And come Friday, when 3 people turn up dead on Boone Ridge the very week of the hearing, she'll know exactly who to give it to." It was a lie. Or part of it was. Maddie didn't know if Caleb had truly stopped at the Webb place, or was building it in the moment off the bones of what she'd told. But it was a beautiful lie, the kind that boxes a man in with his own caution, and she watched it land on Victor Harland and take hold. Because Victor was above all things careful. And a careful man does not commit 3 murders when there is a 4th witness loose with proof. "You're bluffing," Victor said. But there was no certainty in it. "Am I?" Maddie stepped forward again. "You called me worthless in the street, Mr. Harland. Worth less than a lame horse. You want to bet 5 murders on whether a worthless woman thought to leave herself a way to bury you from the grave, because that's the bet you're making right now standing in this yard. You're betting I'm as stupid as you told the whole town I was." She let it sit. "Go ahead, take the bet. Or ride down this mountain and try your luck Friday like a civilized man. Your choice. But choose quick, because the longer you stand here, the more it looks like exactly what it is. And I don't think your hired men signed on for a hanging." She watched the 4 men on the horses. Watched the words "signed on for a hanging" go through them. Watched one of them shift in his saddle, glance at the man beside him, and ease his hand a careful inch away from his gun. These were paid men. Maddie had counted on that. Paid men will rough up a rancher and burn a barn for wages. But paid men do not hang for an employer, and the moment killing turned from a job into a noose, they started doing their own arithmetic, and Victor felt them doing it, felt the ground shifting under him, his 5 guns becoming 4, becoming maybe none at all. "This isn't over," Victor said. His voice had gone low and shaking with fury. "You hear me? A clerk's stolen books, and a widow's word, and a half-burned scrap. You think a federal court takes the word of a thieving clerk and a worthless woman over a partner of the cattleman's trust? You think anyone—" "Yes," said Maddie simply. "I do, because it's not our word, Mr. Harland. That's the part you keep failing to understand, and it's going to be the end of you. It was never going to be our word against yours. It's your own books against you, your hand, your numbers. You're safe. A clerk didn't make those entries up, you dictated them. A widow didn't forge that foreclosure, you ordered it. And a worthless woman didn't invent that receipt, you wrote it. And then you tried to burn it, and you failed." She lifted her chin. "We're not asking the court to believe us over you. We're just handing the court you. All we did was carry it to them." For a long moment, Victor Harland stood in the yard, and Maddie watched the calculation run behind his eyes, the same cold arithmetic he'd lived by his whole life, the arithmetic that had always favored him. And she watched it come up for the first time in his life against him. 4 paid men who wouldn't hang. A clerk with the green books in hand. A widow down road with proof. A receipt he'd thought was ash. Letters 2 days into the mail. And a federal court 2 days off where his name meant nothing. The arithmetic didn't favor him anymore. "Mount up," Victor said suddenly to his men. "Mr. Harland, mount up." He was already swinging onto his horse, and his face had become a careful mask again, smoothing over the businessman, reasserting himself over the cornered animal. "We're done here. For now." He gathered his reins and looked down at the 3 of them on the porch, the cowboy with the rifle, the clerk with the books, the woman in gray. "But understand me, all of you. This is a long way from finished. I have built things in this territory you can't imagine, and I have friends in places you've never heard of. And I will not be brought down by a stack of paper and a woman who smells of the gutter she crawled out of." He wheeled his horse. "Friday's hearing goes forward. I'll have my judgment. And what happens after, we'll see whose arithmetic holds. Also shmani." And then he spurred his horse and was gone, his 4 men thundering after him down the mountain road, the dust of them rising and hanging in the early light. For a moment, none of the 3 on the porch moved. Then Elias lowered the rifle, and his arms were shaking, and he turned and looked at Maddie, like he was seeing something he didn't have words for. "You talked 5 armed men off my porch," he said. "With nothing. You had nothing in your hands, Maddie. No gun, no card to play. And you talked them off my land like you held every ace in the deck." "I held 1 ace," Maddie said. Her own legs had gone to water now that it was over, and she put a hand on the porch rail to steady herself. "I held the only thing a careful man fears more than poverty. I held the noose. And Victor Harlan's careful enough to fear a noose more than he wants this ranch at least for one more morning." She looked at Caleb, and her voice gentled. "And I held you, Mr. Stoss. You came back. You doubled through the trees, and you sat in those rocks all night with his books in your hands, and you waited, and when it mattered you stood up." She crossed to him and put her hand on his shaking shoulder. "I bet on you. I told Mr. Boone you were a man who'd rather die clean than live dirty. You proved me right. Thank you." Caleb Stoss. 4 years a coward, and one morning a hero put his face down toward the green books in his arms and wept without shame. "Was it true?" Elias asked him quietly. "The Webb widow. Did you really stop and tell her leave her the pages, or half of it?" Caleb wiped his face with his sleeve. "I did stop. I did show her the foreclosure and the page with her husband's name, but I didn't leave her a copy. There wasn't time, and I was scared, and I told her to be ready, and I wrote on." He looked up. "When Miss Reed said I'd left her proof, I just followed her lead. It came out of my mouth before I knew it. I lied to Victor Harlan's face. I never lied to him in 4 years. I was too scared." A shaky laugh broke out of him. "First lie I ever told the man, and it ran him off his own scheme." "It wasn't a lie," Maddie said. "Not anymore. It's just a thing that hasn't happened yet." She straightened the steel coming back into her now that the shaking had passed. "Because the first thing we do this morning is make it true. We ride to the Webb place, all 3 of us, and we leave that widow real copies of the pages with her husband's name. So that the lie that saved us becomes the truth that protects us. Victor will check sooner or later. When he does, I want it to be exactly as we said." She was already moving, already planning. "And the second thing is you eat," Elias said. She stopped, looked at him. "You've been up all night, and you talked down 5 guns on an empty stomach," he said. And there was the ghost of his almost smile. "And I told you the first day, Maddie Reed, nobody in my house asks for scraps, and nobody in my house fights a war without a full plate first. The war'll keep 10 minutes. Sit down, eat, then we'll go bury Victor Harlan together the proper way with paper." And Maddie Reed, who'd crawled in the dirt for bread 3 weeks ago, who'd been called worth less than a lame horse by the man who'd just fled her, who'd sworn she would never again need anybody, sat down at the table of the mountain cowboy who'd stood beside her, and let him put a full plate in front of her, and ate. They were on the road within the hour. The Webb place sat lonesome on the lower road, a hard-scrabble cabin on land that no longer belonged to the woman living in it, and the widow Webb came to the door with a shotgun and a boy of maybe 10 at her hip, and old grief carved deep in her face. She didn't lower the gun until Caleb stepped forward, hat in his hands. "Mrs. Webb, you won't remember me kindly. I'm the clerk that wrote the paper took your land." His voice broke. "I come to make it right, ma'am, far as it can be made, and to tell you who really killed your husband. It wasn't the drought, and it wasn't your man's failing, and it wasn't God. It was one man's hand in your pocket for 3 years running, and we've got him, ma'am. We've finally got him, but we need your help to hang him." The shotgun came down slow. They sat at the widow Webb's poor table, and it was Maddie who laid it out gentle but complete, the whole scheme, the skim, the green books, the receipt, Friday's hearing, and Monday's reckoning. And she watched the grief on the widow's face turn slow to something harder and cleaner. "You're telling me," the widow Webb said, "that my Tom didn't fail, that he was robbed, that he hung himself in that barn over a debt that was a lie, put on him a purpose by a rich man who's still riding around free in a fine coat." "Yes, ma'am," Maddie said. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." The widow Webb was quiet a long time. "What do you need from me?" she said finally. Your words sworn before a federal judge, the story of what was done to your husband and your land, and your willingness to stand up in a courtroom and say it to Victor Harlan's face. Maddie reached across the table and took the woman's worn hand. I know what I'm asking. I know it means living it all again. I wouldn't ask if there were another way. But the more honest voices we put in that courtroom, the harder it is for them to call us liars, and the surer it is that he hangs. One worth they can dismiss. 2 widows and a clerk and a rancher and 9 cheated ranchers and a federal court and the man's own books. She tightened her grip. That Mrs. Webb is a flood, and he built his whole house in a dry riverbed. The widow Webb looked down at their joined hands. Then she looked at her boy, sitting silent and big-eyed by the cold hearth, the boy who'd found his father in the barn. My Tom was a good man, she said. A good man who died thinking he'd failed his family, thinking it was his own doing. Her voice shook, and then went iron. You give me a chance to stand up in a courtroom and tell the whole world it wasn't his failing that he was murdered slow by a thief in a good coat. You give me the chance to give my boy his father's good name back. She gripped Maddie's hand so hard it hurt. I'll walk to that court barefoot. I'll swear on every Bible they've got. You point me at Victor Harlan, and you watch what a hanged man's widow does to him. And Maddie Reed holding the hand of a woman the system had crushed and discarded. The same way it had tried to crush and discard her, felt the last piece of the thing lock into place. They rode for the federal courthouse that same afternoon, Elias and Maddie and Caleb with his green books, the widow Webb following in her cart with her boy, 2 days hard, rode ahead of them. While back in the hometown, Victor Harlan prepared for his Friday triumph, certain that the worst he faced was a stack of paper and a woman who smelled of the gutter, never once guessing that the gutter had organized itself into a flood, and that the flood was already moving, and that it was coming not for his Friday, but for his life. They reached the federal courthouse on the morning of the second day, road-worn and dust-caked, and Maddie Reed walked up the courthouse steps with her father's ledger held against her chest, exactly the way she'd held it in the dust 3 weeks before. Only now there was no town laughing behind her. Now there was an army at her back. A cowboy, a clerk, a widow and her boy, and a satchel of paper heavy enough to hang a man. The federal prosecutor was a lean gray man named Harmon Price, who had spent 20 years watching rich men buy their way out of trouble and had developed a permanent sourness about it. He listened to Maddie lay it out across his desk for the better part of an hour, asked his sharp questions paged slow through the green books, and when he was done, he sat back and looked at her a long while. Miss Reed, he said, in 20 years I have had a great many people walk into this office certain they'd brought me a hanging. Most of them brought me grievance and feeling, and not a single thing a court could use. He tapped the green books. You've brought me a man's own confession in his own hand, matched against an original receipt he tried to destroy, corroborated by the clerk who kept the books, supported by a foreclosure victim's sworn account, and 9 signed complaints from cheated ranchers across 3 counties. He took off his spectacles. I have never in my life been handed a case this clean. Who taught you to build it? My father, Maddie said. He ran cattle accounts 30 years. He used to say a man's books are his confession. Your father was right. Price stood and gathered the green books to his chest. Go get some rest, all of you. You've done the hard part. The rest belongs to the United States now. He paused at the door. There's a marshal rides out of here this afternoon for your home county. He'll arrive Friday morning. I'm told there's a county hearing that day where a Mr. Victor Harlan expects to win himself a ranch. There is, Elias said. A thin, cold smile moved across the sour prosecutor's face. Then let's let him win it, Price said, right up until the moment my marshal walks through the door. Friday came, and back in the hometown, the county hearing convened in the upstairs room of the bank, and it went exactly as Victor Harlan had planned it. He arrived in his finest coat. Crane the banker sat at the head of the table with his bought judge beside him, and the room was full of townspeople come to watch the failing rancher get what was coming to him, the same townspeople who'd laughed in the street 3 weeks before. Victor laid out his case with all his old polish. The drought, the debt, the insolvency, the desperate widow Reed and her foolish little book, which he dismissed with a wave as the scribbling of a hysterical woman. He called Elias Boone insolvent, and Crane the banker confirmed it, and the bought judge nodded, and the gavel came up to award Boone Ridge Ranch and its precious water to the Cattlemen's Trust, from whom Victor Harland would buy it Monday for back taxes. And that was the moment the door at the back of the room opened. The federal marshal came in first, a broad man with a star on his chest, and no hurry in him. And behind him came Harmon Price, the federal prosecutor with the green books under his arm. And behind him came Elias Boone and Caleb Stoss, and the widow Webb, with her boy's hand in hers, and last of all came Mattie Reed in her plain gray dress, her chin up her father's ledger against her chest. The gavel stopped in the air. "My apologies for the interruption," Price said into the dead silence in the dry, flat voice of a man who was not sorry at all. "But this county hearing is suspended effective immediately by order of the Federal Circuit Court. There's a larger matter that takes precedence." He set the green books on the table in front of Crane, and the judge with a heavy thump. "The matter of United States versus Victor Harland, fraud, embezzlement, and the theft of property across 5 counties. The room erupted. Victor was on his feet. "This is outrageous. These proceedings are legal. I have the bank's judgment. I have—" "Sit down, Mr. Harland," the marshal said. "You don't understand who I am. I understand exactly who you are." The marshal's hand rested easy on his gun. "You're the man whose name is in these books 200 times in his own hand. Now sit down before I sit you down." Victor did not sit down. His careful mask was gone entirely now, and what showed underneath was the cornered animal Mattie had glimpsed on the porch, and his eyes swept the room wild until they found her. Found Mattie Reed standing quiet by the door and locked there with pure hatred. "You," he breathed. "You did this. You worthless—" "Mr. Harland." It was Mattie who cut him off, and she stepped forward into the center of the room, and her voice carried clear to every corner, to every townsperson who'd laughed at her, to Crane, and the bought judge gone gray-faced, to the marshal and the prosecutor and the widow Webb. "3 weeks ago, you stood in the street outside that mercantile, and you told this whole town I was worth less than a lame horse. Do you remember a woman with no husband, no land, no money, worthless?" They laughed. She turned slowly, taking in the room, taking in the faces of the townspeople who'd done the laughing. "Some of you laughed too. I remember which of you." Nobody met her eyes. "I knelt in your street and gathered my ruined flower out of the dirt with my hands," Mattie went on. "And not one of you helped me. One man did." She didn't look at Elias, but everyone in that room felt the weight of where she didn't look. "One man got down off his horse and stood beside me when standing beside me cost him something. And it turns out, Mr. Harland, that one man standing beside you is worth more than a whole town laughing at you. Because that one man gave me a roof, and at that roof was a table, and on that table were the books, and I know how to read books." Her voice dropped, and somehow the whole room leaned in. "You called me worthless, and then you handed me season after season the proof of every crime you ever committed because you were so certain a worthless woman could never read it. That was your mistake, Mr. Harland. Not the drought, not the debt. Me. You looked at the one thing in this territory that could destroy you, and because it came in a gray dress and an empty purse, you called it worthless and turned your back. And it read your books." The silence in the room was absolute. "I'd like to enter into the record," Price said dryly, "that I concur with the witness's assessment." He opened the topmost green book to a marked page and laid it before the bought judge, whose hands had begun to tremble. "Your Honor and I use the term loosely, as I understand your appointment may shortly be reviewed. Perhaps you'd care to read aloud the entry for the Webb foreclosure. And then the entry 3 lines down, recording the sum Mr. Harland skimmed from that same transaction and hid from the Cattlemen's Trust." The judge did not read it aloud. The judge had gone the color of paste. But the widow Webb stepped forward. "I'll read it," she said. "I learned my letters late, but I learned 'em. Give it here." And she took the green book in her work-roughened hands, and she found the line with her husband's name, and in a voice that shook and then steadied and then rang out clear as a bell. The widow Webb read aloud the entry that recorded the foreclosure that had driven her husband to his barn, and then the line 3 down. The cold little notation of the money Victor Harland had pocketed off the back of Tom Webb's death. When she finished, she lifted her head and looked at Victor Harland across the room, and she did not weep, and her voice did not break. "My Tom thought he failed us," the widow Webb said. "He died in our barn thinking he'd failed his family. For a year I've raised my boy in the shadow of that his daddy gave up, that his daddy was weak." She set the green book down. "He wasn't weak, he was robbed. By you. And now my boy knows it, and this whole room knows it, and a federal court knows it, and you are going to hang Victor Harland. And the last thing I want you to understand before they put the rope on you is that it was the people you called worthless who did it. A clerk too poor to matter, a widow too broke to fight, and an accountswoman you laughed at in the dirt." She gathered her boy against her side. "We were never worthless. You just couldn't afford to know it." Victor Harland looked around the room one last time at the marshal, at the prosecutor at Crane, the banker already edging away from him, at the bought judge who would not look at him, at the townspeople who had laughed for him and would now testify against him, at the clerk and the widow and the cowboy and the woman in gray. And Matty watched the exact moment his arithmetic finally completely failed. He bolted for the side door. He got 3 steps. The marshal had him by the collar before he reached the 4th, and the irons were on his wrists before he'd finished cursing, and Victor Harland was dragged out of that bank in front of the whole town that had once been his. No longer the polished broker, no longer the man, even the bank feared just a thief in a fine coat being hauled to a federal cell. At the door, he twisted back one last time and found Matty's eyes. "This isn't justice," he spat. "It's just a clever woman and a stack of paper." "No, Mr. Harland," Matty said quietly. "Justice is exactly a clever woman and a stack of paper. That's all it ever was. You just always had enough money to keep the paper out of clever hands. This time you didn't." She held his gaze until they dragged him through the door. "Goodbye, Mr. Harland. Give my regards to the lame horse. Turns out we were both worth more than you thought." And then he was gone and the door swung shut and it was over. The reckoning came fast, after that, the way these things do once the dam breaks. Crane the banker turned state's witness within the hour, trading every secret he had for a lighter sentence, and his testimony buried Victor deeper than the books alone ever could have. The bought judge resigned before the Federal Review could reach him. The 4 stolen ranches were ordered returned. The Webb land came back to the widow Webb and her boy free and clear, with the skimmed money restored from Victor's seized accounts too late to give the boy his father, but in time to give him his father's good name, which the widow said weeping was the thing she'd wanted most in all the world. Caleb Stoss, who'd held the pen on 4 years of crime and then ridden up a mountain in the dark to undo it, served 30 days and walked out a free man with the federal prosecutor's own letter of commendation in his pocket. And the first thing he did was ride to Boone Ridge to thank the people who'd taken him in when he had nothing left but his conscience. And Elias Boone's mortgage, the noose that had been tightening around his family's land for 3 years, was voided entire. The debt declared the fruit of fraud. The $1,100 wiped clean. Boone Ridge Ranch, his free and clear, for the first time in longer than he could remember. It was on the porch of that ranch weeks later, with the summer easing, and the creek run higher after a rain, and the cattle starting to fill out on grass, nobody was stealing from them anymore, that Elias Boone finally said the thing he'd been carrying since the creek, since the porch at dawn, since a dusty street 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. They were sitting together watching the light go down off the ridges. 2 cups of coffee gone cold between them, and the silence was the easy kind, now the kind they'd built over 100 suppers and 1 war. "Matty," he said. "Elias. I've been trying to figure how to say this for about a month, and I never could find the right words, so I'm just going to say it plain the way we do." He turned his cup in his big, careful hands. "Before you walked up that mountain, this place was land and debt and silence. That's all it was. I worked it alone, and I figured I'd die on it alone, and that was the bargain a Boone made, same as my father, after my mother passed. I'd made my peace with it. A man and his land and nobody to share it with. He looked at her. And then a worthless widow walked into my creek to pull a calf out of the mud and laughed while she did it, and I— His voice roughened. And I remembered what it looked like, a ranch with 2 people on it instead of 1. And I can't go back to 1, Maddie. I find I haven't got it in me. I don't want the silence back. Maddie's heart was going hard, but she made herself stay still. Made herself let him finish, because she'd learned that this man's plain words cost him something, and ought to be received whole. "I'm not asking you to keep my house," Elias said. "You never were hired help, not really. Not after that first night over the books, and we both know it. I'm asking you to stay. Not as the woman who keeps my accounts, as my wife, as my partner, as an equal in everything this ranch is and everything it might become." He set down the cup. "I haven't got much to offer that the whole world would call a prize, a mended barn, a herd that's coming back, a name that 3 counties laughed at, though they've stopped laughing now. But it's mine free and clear, and I'd give the whole of it to you gladly, every acre, if you'd have a wounded mountain cowboy who can rope a steer in the dark, but never could read his own ruin until you read it for him." For a moment, Maddie couldn't speak. She'd sworn off this. She'd sworn it on her father's grave, never again to need a man, never again to pay the cost her mother had paid. She'd walked up this mountain 3 weeks ago, with 1 carpet bag and a ledger and a heart she'd locked shut against the whole hard world. And the world had handed her against every oath she'd made, the one thing she'd never thought to want, a man who'd stood beside her in the dust, who'd put a full plate in front of a starving stranger and called it nothing, who saw her sharpness not as a thing to fear, but a thing to honor, who was asking her not to be saved, but to be his equal. "Elias Boone," she said, and her voice was not steady, and she let it not be steady. "The day I met you, you offered me work, and I told you I don't take charity, and I don't beg for my place. I work for it. Do you remember? Every word." "Well—" She reached over and took his rough hand in both of hers. "I'm going to hold you to the same standard. I won't be your wife as charity. I won't be a thing you took in off the street and felt good about. If I stay—" Her voice caught and steadied the way the widow Webb's had. "If I stay, my name goes on the ledger beside yours, on the deed, on everything. Not Mrs. Elias Boone, the cowboy's wife. Maddie Boone, partner, equal every acre, half mine and half yours. My work and my name standing right alongside your own where the whole world can see it. I'll have it that way, or I'll have it no way. Because I have been worth less than a lame horse in this territory, Elias and I will never again be worth a fraction of any man. Not even you, especially not you. The man I marry, I stand beside, not behind." Elias Boone looked at her, and slower than a sunrise. The ghost of a smile she'd been chasing for a month finally bloomed full and real across his tired face. "Maddie," he said, "your name already is on the ledger. You put it there yourself the 3rd week when you balanced the accounts. I saw it down in the corner in your own hand. M. Reed kept true. I never said anything, but I saw it. Your name's been on my books longer than I've had the nerve to ask for your hand." He turned his hand in hers so their fingers laced. "Put it on the deed, too. Put it everywhere. I never wanted a wife to stand behind me. I had a mother who worked beside my father as his equal till the day she died. And I always knew if I ever found that I'd never settle for less. I found it, right here, in a gray dress reading my ruin by lamplight." He lifted her hand and pressed it to his rough cheek. "Stand beside me, Maddie Reed, equal in everything. Your name and mine kept true side by side. That's the only kind of marriage I ever wanted, and I'd near given up believing it'd ride up my mountain." "It already did," Maddie whispered, and on the porch of Boone Ridge Ranch, with the summer light going gold over the ridges and the creek running free below, and the cattle grazing grass that no man would ever steal from them again. Elias Boone leaned across the cold coffee and kissed the woman a whole town had called worthless, and Maddie Reed, who had knelt in the dust for scraps and risen to bring down the most powerful man in the territory, kissed him back, equal, unafraid, and entirely unashamed of needing at last to be needed in return. The years that came after were good ones. Boone Ridge thrived the way it was always meant to. The barn stood strong and freshly painted. The herd grew fat and sold direct at honest prices to honest buyers, for the Cattle Association, scandalized to its bones by what Victor Harlowit had reformed its whole way of doing business, and the small mountain ranchers who'd once been prey now sold straight and fair and kept what they earned. The water that Victor had killed to control flowed free for the whole valley, shared the way Elias's father would have shared it, and the Down Valley ranchers who'd nearly lost everything came to think of Boone Ridge not as the spread that controlled the spring, but as the family that had broken the man who'd tried to. Caleb Stoss took over the accounts for half those ranches, an honest clerk for honest men, and never held a crooked pen again. The widow Webb worked her returned land with her growing boy beside her, and the boy grew up knowing every day of his life that his father had been a good man, robbed, and not a weak man who'd failed, and that knowledge the widow always said was worth more than all the acres in the territory. And Victor Harland hanged. Not metaphorically. The federal court presented with his own books in his own hand the testimony of a banker and a clerk and a widow and 9 ranchers. The murder by foreclosure of Tom Webb laid plain at his feet, found him guilty on every count, and he went to the gallows, still insisting to the very end that it wasn't justice, that it was only a clever woman and a stack of paper. He never did understand that those were the same thing. Mattie Boone's name went on the deed beside her husband's, and on the ledger, and on the brand, and on the gate. Equal in everything exactly as she'd said. She ran the books and the business, and Elias ran the land and the herd, and they made every decision that mattered together over the kitchen table. 2 cups of coffee between them, the way her mother and his had never quite been allowed to, and on summer evenings, when the work was done, and the light went gold over the ridges, Elias Boone would come up from the barn and find his wife on the porch, with the ledger open on the table beside her, balanced to the penny, her chestnut hair gone a little gray now, and her eyes no longer tired but clear and certain and at peace. And he'd sit down beside her, and she'd pour his coffee, and they'd watch the dust glow gold over the land that was theirs, both of theirs, free and clear, kept true. Mattie Reed had walked up that mountain worth by the reckoning of the world less than a lame horse. She'd walked up it with 1 carpet bag, 1 ledger, and a heart locked shut, and she had found in a wounded cowboy who got down off his horse when no one else would. The one truth the whole hard world had tried to teach her was a lie that real love is not rescue and never was. It's respect. It's 2 people standing side by side when the world expects one of them to fall and refusing together to fall at all. She was never worthless. She just hadn't yet met the one man with eyes clear enough to see it. And once he did, they built a whole life on the seeing, strong as the barn, true as the ledger, lasting as the mountains themselves.